Hello everyone and welcome to the Strategoid channel. In today's video we'll be taking an in-depth look at the Lumineth Wardens. We'll start things off by evaluating the warscroll. Next we'll discuss their role in a Lumineth army and teach you certain Warden basics. Finally we'll go over 4 tips and tricks to maximize this unit's potential. Let's kick things off with their warscroll. At first glance the basic stats of the Venari Wardens seem mediocre at best. They have 1 wound each, a 4+ save and a move of 6 inch. Their bravery is 6, which is far from reliable. When it comes to weapons, they can only fight in melee. Their champion, the High Warden, fights with a champion's blade, while the other wardens use their warden pikes. Note that the champion's blade has a much shorter range than the pikes, which will dictate the High Warden's placement in the unit. Even though their stats are about average, Lumineth Wardens are a staple in almost all Lumineth lists. Thanks to their stellar warscroll abilities, they are one of the best battle line units in the game. The Shining Company rule is one of those abilities that really makes this unit, well, shine. All Venari units benefit from this rule as long as every model's base touches 2 other bases from the models in the same unit. While this is the case, your opponent must subtract 1 from hit rolls that target a unit in a Shining Company. This is obviously a huge boon to their durability. The downside though is that they cannot run, nor charge while they're in the Shining Company, and they can only pile in 1 inch. This forces Lumineth players to really think about their full turn, and even the next one, before they make a move. The next ability is specific to the High Warden. Once per battle, at the start of the combat phase, you can pick 1 enemy unit within 3 inches of the Warden. You then roll a dice. On a 2+, you inflict D3 mortal wounds. This ability is great for chipping at heroes or straggler units, which we will talk about further in our tips and tricks section. As far as abilities go though, the Sun Metal weapon ability is probably their strongest one. All unmodified hit rolls of 6 made with Warden pikes inflict a mortal wound instead of normal damage. You don't even need to roll a wound roll, which greatly increases their reliability. Wall of Blades is a bit more flavorful, but still hugely beneficial to the Warden's damage output. As long as you target an enemy unit that made a charge move this turn, you can add 1 to the wound rolls made with Warden pikes and improve their rend by 1. It's important to note here that this ability comes into play against any enemy that charged, not just the unit that charged the Wardens. This means that you'll be able to use Wall of Blades much more easily, thanks to the pile-in moves and the 3-inch range of the Warden pikes. And last but certainly not least, this unit is a wizard, as long as it has 5 or more models. The High Warden can choose to cast and unbind 1 spell in the magic phase. They also know the power of Hish spell, which turns units like Wardens and Sentinels into incredible damage powerhouses. Power of Hish has a casting value of 6+. Until the next hero phase, Sun Metal weapons inflict mortal wounds on an unmodified hit roll of 5+, rather than a 6+. This means that 1/3 of all your attacks will automatically inflict a mortal wound. Keep in mind that any number of Lumineth wizards can cast this spell, so it's possible to have Power of Hish up on several units at the same time. This is probably the most useful and utilized rule in the entire Lumineth army. Now that we've tackled their warscroll and abilities, we can start to see which roles Wardens can fulfill in your force. We separated these in 5 different categories. First of all, Wardens are basically the only battle line unit that you can take in a Lumineth army without any other requirements. On top of that, you can make 1 Dawn Rider or Sentinel unit battle line for each Warden unit that you have in your army. This means that you will probably see them in all competitive lists. The other roles they fulfill on top of being battle line. The first one of these is being a hammer. For this to work, you will need a unit of at least 20 models. Thanks to their massive 3-inch range, you'll be able to attack with the most models in almost any situation. Add mortal wounds on 5s to that combination and you have a unit that can demolish almost anything in the game. It is important to remember though that they're still rather fragile. If you need to hit hard with this unit, you will need to hit first, especially against damage-oriented targets like Uruks or God models. That's why it's vital to break the Shining Company in the movement phase, so you can charge in your charge phase. If defense is more up your alley though, it's very doable to turn Wardens into a hard to hit anvil. Preferably you'll have a unit of 20 models again, just to have some wound redundance. Make sure you have someone cast Protection of Hish near them, so they'll benefit from a 5+ ward save. Combine it with Aether Quartz and Mystic Shield, which both increase their save by 1, and their Shining Company rule, and you'll have a unit that's -1 to hit, has a 3+ save, ignores -1 rend, and has a 5+ ward save. Obviously this requires some resource investment, but if you keep them alive long enough, you can still hit back like the Secret Hammer unit you are. Rather than taking 20 in one unit, you can also take these at their minimum size. However, they do fulfill a different role in that case. Small units are excellent screens that can soak up destructive charges. I'm looking at you, Auric Mawcrushes, so you can protect your important pieces. Thanks to their many defensive buffs like Aether Quartz and Shining Company, they even have a chance of survival, contrary to most screening units. The last role, and probably one of their most important ones, is the one of objective grabbing. Obviously they can be any size to fulfill this role. Thanks to the Speed of Hish spell, which is cast on a doable 5+, they can move 12 inches without even running. They can also be hard to shift, especially when you invest the same resources that you would when building them as an anvil. Now let's look at the basics of using the Wardens. We'll go over which nations fit them best, which spells you should probably pick and cast, how to deploy them, and how to move your models while in the movement phase. You can obviously make use of Wardens in any nation, but there are certain ones from which they benefit more, and less. The latter is the case for Geometrica. Wardens do not gain anything from being picked in a Geometrica force, so for this unit specifically, I would rate this nation with an F. Sayar, on the other hand, is a definite A+. It enables double Aether Quartz, which makes Wardens more tanky and more killy. Another fine choice is Iliatha, which is also the most flavorful and lore-friendly option when you combine them with Sentinels and other Vanari units. It adds 2 to their bravery, enables them to reroll hits of 1, and you can duplicate command abilities on close-by Vanari units for free. All in all, Iliatha is therefore a good choice, but thanks to all the buffs Wardens already benefit from, Iliatha's bonuses are more like icing on top, rather than a full extra cake. Zytrek, however, is up there with Sayar. It adds 1 to all casting rolls, which makes all your spells, especially Power of Hish, much more reliable. It also gives all units an extra spell that can cause D3 mortal wounds, and half the enemy movement. A great tool for both damage and board control. It is probably also the easiest nation to play, to be fair. Alumnia is probably the only one in this list that not all Lumineth players would rate the same way. From my perspective, it does not fit the Lumineth Castle playstyle very well, as it gives you some pre-game moves and a run and charge command ability. It does however open up some possibilities for an alpha strike with a block of 20 Wardens, and makes board control much easier. Finally, Helen is also a really solid choice. The command ability allows some surprise move and shenanigans, which can serve to protect your force, be surprisingly aggressive, or unexpectedly claim objectives. All in all, this is a great choice for all Lumineth units, Wardens definitely included. When it comes to spells, Power of Hish is probably the most important one. This spell is included on their warscroll, as stated before, and usually takes precedence over other spells, especially when you expect to be in combat this turn and survival is not your priority. Wardens are also allowed to take 1 extra spell from the Lore of Hish. Depending on what role you want them to fulfill, these spells can vary. I'd personally opt for Ethereal Blessing if you want them to screen or defend. Take Speed of Hish, or possibly even Solar Flare, for objective play and board control. If you expect your Wardens to close in on your opponent and you have a lot of ranged power to back them up, you could also take Lambent Light. Protection of Hish and Total Eclipse are also fantastic spells, but are better taken on different units. Remember that your spell selection will depend greatly on both your playstyle and your army list. We will discuss this more in depth in a different video. Now let's spend a minute on deploying your wardens. There is 3 things I always try to keep in mind. First, make sure you keep the models of your backline within 3 inches of the front of the unit. This way, you'll always be able to attack with all your pikes when they get charged from the front. I'd also attempt to keep your high warden in the first row, so his 1-inch blade can strike in melee and he has an easier time with being in range with spells. Lastly, I like to keep my key warden units within a 9-inch bubble of protection of Hish. This is especially important when you want them to be an anvil, or even just a screen. Usually I cast protection of Hish with a Lord Regent or a Cathalar, who want to be close to big units anyway, so this should be very doable without hampering your movement. When you're setting up your wardens, it's also useful to decide how you intend to use them in the first couple of turns. If you want to keep them alive longer, deploy them deep rather than wide. This minimizes enemy pile-in opportunities. Also always keep them in shining company, and watch for abilities that single out your high warden, like the put you in my pocket ability from the Sons of Behemoth. If you plan on being aggressive or you want to protect a big unit behind your wardens, deploy them wide rather than deep. This way you can attempt to envelop your enemy, reducing their movement. It's also easier to advance up the board and hold off enemy units from taking objectives. Finally, keep in mind all the different ways they can move and charge. In most cases they will move up to 6 inches or less, especially since they can't run when they're still in the Shining Company. During your movement, you should also break up your Shining Company formation if you want to charge later in the same turn. If you want to run, however, you need to break this formation 1 turn in advance, otherwise they won't be able to. Remember that if you really want to raise up the board, you can always use Speed of Hish to double their movement to 12 inches, running excluded. This can make them incredibly fast. You'll also be able to still charge if you haven't ran. Since the right formation is key for Lumineth Wardens, the movement phase is also the best time to rearrange your ranks when you're preparing for an impending engagement. I'd like to round off the video with 4 tips and tricks that I use a lot in all of my games. The first one I call the Flask Snipe, which is a dependable way to kill a character or even a small unit without much of a problem. Begin by casting Arcane Bolt, but do not fire it. Make sure your High Warden is within 3 inches of your target. Then, use your Moonfire Flask to inflict D3 mortal wounds on a 2+, and add another D3 from your Arcane Bolt. This means that you'll be dishing out 2 D3 mortal wounds before the fight has even started. The Light 'em Up tactic is Lumineth Classic, and expects you to field a strong ranged unit like Sentinels. Move your Wardens within 18 inches of your desired target and cast Lambent Light. Shoot with your Sentinels, who should destroy the target with rerolling hits while you fish for mortal wounds. You can then charge in with your Wardens to finish off anything that's left. If you love ranged dominance as much as the next elf, think about screening a big block of Sentinels with a minimum sized unit of Wardens. Keep the front line within 6 inches of the Sentinels, so they can unleash hell on anything that charges the Wardens. To add salt to injury, you will probably be able to shoot the same target in your next turn if need be. The last trick I want to leave you with, I lovingly call Elf Not on the Shelf. I hardly use this tactic, but it's incredibly satisfying to pull off, and a great surprise for your opponents. Start off by casting Ethereal Blessing on a big block of Wardens. This makes them immune to save modifiers, which is useful to soak up higher end attacks. Then, cast Transporting Vortex and teleport them into your enemy's back line. Or you could just drop them on an objective and claim it right away. If your opponent is not able to respond quickly to this new threat, 20 Wardens serve as a fantastic hammer unit that will absolutely obliterate their back line. Overwhelm them with elven excellence. And so we've come to the end of this video. Of course, there's much more to talk about, but we hope you've enjoyed the love and strategies we've put into this clip. Please feel free to leave a like if you did, or even share and subscribe. We'll be posting more in-depth guides on Lumineth in the future, including a video on how to counter them. If you have any more Lumineth ideas to share with the Elven mages in the comments, please do. We look forward to seeing you again in our next video. Take care and have a great day.